So I'm sure you all will have seen a lot of discussion about the state of the UK's economy. You'll see a lot of people posting going, Rachel Reeves has screwed it up, the budget was terrible, and now international markets are reacting poorly. This is a lot of the news that we've seen. Now, what's the basis for this news? Well, the basis is the fact that gilt yields, which is essentially the interest that UK has to pay on the gilts and bonds that it issues, the yields have increased by about a percentage point, and they're now at their kind of highest rate that they've been for quite a while. So what this means overall is that the UK will have to pay more money to service its debt over time now that those yields have increased. So what does higher debt service mean overall for the economy? Well, it means that more amount of taxpayers' money is going to have to go to financing previous debt that was engaged in by the government, or deficit spending. Now, the way this gets reported a lot is that this means that Rachel Reeves had her fiscal headroom wiped out. A certain amount of increase in bond yields, that increases the amount that's being paid on government debt. That reduces the amount to which the ceiling is for how much Rachel Reeves can spend without breaking her fiscal rules. Now, this is where it's really important to understand that a lot of the things we're talking about today are self-imposed by the government. A lot of these things are self-imposed by the government, what we're dealing with here, which is the fiscal rule that they have, which is that we will only spend money from taxation receipts on day-to-day spending, and we can deficit spend, but only if that's being spent on investment. So that's ring-fenced specifically for investment. She would break that rule because we might have to issue more bonds to pay down the interest on previous bonds that were issued. That would break the fiscal rule. I mean, there was a reason why a lot of economists in the run-up to the election were saying that the fiscal rules were silly. We were all saying in this stream very specifically that the fiscal rules were entirely made up. They are no way a accurate representation of what levers Rachel Reeves could have at her disposal. She is very specifically limiting the levers that she does have through this fiscal outlook. That is a problem. So this leaves Rachel Reeves with two options, really, if she doesn't want to break the fiscal rule, which is to cut spending or to increase taxes. And it looks like what they're going to be doing, because they've essentially ruled out a bunch of different taxes because they didn't think that it would be viable to get elected on that basis. A lot of the tax rises that they could do to increase the level of taxation to pay for the increase in payment on the government debt, they've completely ruled that out. So this means with her avenue for tax rises pretty easily shut off by the promises that she made in the run-up to the election, that leaves us in the position where we're basically only looking at spending cuts. Now, where do you think those cuts might happen, chat? Is it coming with money they're spending to the arms industry? No, it's not. Is it coming in how much that they are spending on a bunch of authoritarian policy in terms of spending on law enforcement, for example? No, that's not getting cut either, and probably for a good thing, because the public doesn't like that. But spending money on Trident, I think, probably is money we could be better be spending on our welfare state, for example. No. Fresh off the back of an election where Keir Starmer said that the burden should fall on those with the broadest shoulders, the spending cuts are coming for people on disability. Yeah, you heard that right. The disabled are going to pay for it yet again. Yet again, the disabled are going to be at the sharp end of government cutbacks to deal with a worrying fiscal outlook. Number 10 plots billions in disability welfare cuts to ease the debt crisis. Reductions in welfare budget targeted amid pressure on Chancellor to prove she can hit borrowing rules. The annual cost of support payments for people with disabilities and health conditions is forecast to soar from 22 billion to 35 billion by 2029, a 60% increase. It comes as Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is under mounting pressure to prove to the markets that she can hit her borrowing rules as the cost of government debt rises. Now, I would take issue with this framing. It is the Tory graph, after all, that somehow she has to prove to the markets that she has to hit her fiscal rule. No, she's proving to herself. Right? She's proving to people internally within the party that she is hitting those rules. That's something that she proves to herself. The markets broadly actually don't really care whether you hit those rules or not. It's about how confident they are in the UK economy, their confidence in, for example, keeping inflation low, or be able to ensure that the government can always repay the debts that it takes out and the bonds that it issues, which, as a sovereign currency issue, is not tied to the euro the vast majority of the time that we can. That might lead to a shortening in the pound, at least somewhat, but there is always going to be the ability of the government to repay debt that it issues because we are a currency issuer. Now, this comes in the wake of the fact that in the run-up to the election, the Conservative government would talk about disability cuts. Ian Duncan Smith's Centre for Social Justice was saying we should cut loads of money from the disabled in terms of welfare payments to be able to plug potential fiscal gaps. And indeed, on top of that, Liz Kendall said that there were loads of things they could do, including getting people to go in to NHS wards with people with pretty severe disability conditions and throw job advisors at them. That's the world that Liz Kendall lives in at the moment. Crazy stuff, I know. So we could be taxing the rich. We could be equalizing capital gains with income tax. We could be taxing wealth or doing a land tax, things that tax assets. That's a problem that we have, is that one thing you're going to hear a lot in the wake of this kind of market turmoil. Well, it's not really turmoil. People like to say that it's somehow this existential crisis for the UK economy. I don't necessarily think that that's true. There are some problems, that's to be sure, but it's not this existential crisis that people on the right especially seem to be making it out. And they're also trying to make that this is somehow a problem because of Rachel Reeves's budget. Now, to be sure, there are criticisms that you can make of the taxes that she chose to rise on national insurance contributions from employers. That can be seen as a jobs tax, quote unquote. However, this is not a problem of Rachel Reeves's own making. There'll be comparisons to Liz Truss. There'll be loads of comparisons to Liz Truss, but these are completely different. These are two completely different situations. So with Liz Truss, the reason why gilt yields spiked, and they spiked overnight, was because of reaction to fiscal policy. It was a reaction to the fact that it happened overnight. It was a reaction to the fact that it was done with essentially no regard for any kind of reporting from the OBR. There was no reports from the Treasury, anything like that. There was no warning to markets previously before the budget was enacted, and it was silly. Like, it was a silly budget that expected to be able to get growth out of just giving rich people tax cuts, and there was no plan on how they would do that. This is coming as direct reaction as well. There is plenty of evidence to show that these massive spike in gilt yields under Liz Truss happened essentially as a reaction to the mini budget. The British budget was in October. That was months ago. Why gilt yields would jump up now rather than later, there's no connection between these things. So anybody who tries to tell you that the current gilt market panic, quote unquote, is a result of state fiscal policy, they're lying to you. They're trying to equate Rachel Reeves and Liz Truss, and there is no equation here. The problem, of course, is that this is a result of international conditions. This is global condition that has led us to the point at which we are seeing gilt yields increase, mostly because the yields on UK gilts are very similar to the yield in US treasuries. So as US treasuries go up, gilt yields also go up. This is a global condition, which is mostly a response to the potential tariffs the United States could be doing to itself and ruining its own economy. This economy that's recovered pretty well post-pandemic in terms of overall growth levels anyway, not in terms of a lot of people who seem to have problems with being able to purchase goods and services, things like the health insurance industry. There are lots of big problems with the US economy. Growth is not one of them. But a lot of the market switch has happened in response to Trump seemingly being very serious about tariffs and potentially a lot of geopolitical instability for a Trump government in terms of what it does with regards to its allies, just threatening tariffs left, right, and center, damaging its own economic relationships with its own previous trading partners. This is pushing up the price of US treasuries, which in turn increases the price of UK gilts. So the idea that this is somehow Rachel Reeves's fault is completely untrue. Anyone who tells you this is Rachel Reeves's fault is lying to you. They're absolutely lying to you. Otherwise, this stuff would have happened when the budget was announced and not randomly in January, completely unrelated, when, of course, this is actually a reaction to the kind of speeches we saw from Trump earlier this week, and that he's not actually bluffing about his desire to be incredibly strong with the economy. I'm not by creating a strong economy as in being a strong man with the economy, using economics as a weapon. This is going to be weakening of the US economy, which has caused the yields on US treasuries to rise, which has then hurt the UK as well. Now, where you can blame Rachel Reeves for is the reaction to this. And if you want economic growth, you could tax assets, like assets are unproductive. We could get growth in this country by making sure people can be productive, allowing investment in productivity. But that's not what the taxes they chose to rise would actually be able to do because they're worried about wealth taxes. So there's a lot of problems they have with their current fiscal outlook at the moment. But the problem, of course, that we have is that she is unwilling to tax the rich, and the cuts that she are doing are on the disabled. So don't try and tell me this isn't austerity. This is austerity. This is looking at market conditions and saying the people who should pay for this, The people who should pay for this are the disabled. It's not the bankers the problem. It's not that the rich are the problem. It's not the asset holders getting fabulously wealthy are the problem. It's that there are too many libraries in Wolverhampton. It's exactly the same justification for austerity that you were getting from George Osborne, except the economic conditions are even worse now, and the potential results of these cuts are going to be felt even worse right now. And that's where you can blame Rachel Reeves, not for creating the crisis, because it's out of her control, but how you respond to the crisis. And there are plenty of things that she could be doing as well, on top of tax rises, that could make this a lot better. So one of the reasons why gilt yields are going up and why the interest rate is remaining sticky is because the bank is currently engaging in quantitative tightening. With an economic slowdown where growth is pretty low, in fact, given that Rachel Reeves said that her plan was to have the highest growing economy in the G7, we're now getting lower growth than we were before the election. At a time when we're seeing potential economic contraction and recession, the Bank of England is engaging in quantitative tightening. It is unwinding its QE and is putting new gilts into the market. They are reselling gilts that they hold into the market. What happens when you increase the supply? The value of it goes down. Therefore, the yield is going to increase. The yields that you pay on gilts are inversely proportional to the supply of gilts within the open market. So the Bank of England is currently making this worse, almost what it seems deliberately, by engaging in quantitative tightening, which makes it harder for the government to borrow money, which makes it harder for it to spend money, which essentially embeds in austerity. So what Rachel Reeves could also do, as well as tax the rich, is tell the Bank of England to stop its quantitative tightening programme, because they are wedded to New Labour's Bank of England Independence Act, despite the fact that that act itself still gives Rachel Reeves the powers to overrule the Bank of England if she feels it economically necessary. And with a potential recession on the horizon and her dreams of economic growth going up in smoke, why the hell would you not do it? A lot of the reasons why interest rates aren't going down at the moment, the base rate, is because the Bank of England is worried about sticky inflation. But the inflation that we are currently seeing is because of energy prices. This is a global energy shock that we're seeing, with the price of LNG increasing and that being a source of most of our inflation. You cannot solve cost push inflation by taking money out of people's pockets. This is not a demand problem. This is a supply problem. This is not too much demand. We don't have a hot economy. We have expensive oil and gas. That is what's causing inflation at the moment. The Bank of England keeping rates high to try and deal with what's only slightly above the 2% target for inflation anyway, by taking money out of the economy, is very, very silly. It's monetarist brain, plain and simple. And again, Rachel Reeves could overrule this, and she is not doing so. And on top of this, another thing that she could do is create a tiered system of interest payments on quantitative easing reserves held by the Bank of England as well. Currently, we just pay the full amount. We could tier that so that we only pay for a certain percentage up to a certain point, and that would save the government billions of pounds as well. We could do that instantaneously overnight. It wouldn't really have much of a shock on the economy. It might change the rates at which private borrowing happens, for example. But what it would do instantaneously is mean that we wouldn't have to make cuts in disability or raise taxes either way, just by changing how much that we have to pay on new debts that's held by the Bank of England. We could do all of these things, and she won't do a single one of them, because she is wedded to Treasury brain. She is wedded to this idea that the previous however many years of paradigm of Treasury brain and how the Treasury functions should not be interfered with, despite the fact that what we are currently seeing is its downward pressure on the UK economy. Again, her central mission as Chancellor for this level of high growth, and it's being completely stymied by ridiculous actions from the Bank of England, which she could overrule, and she is not doing so. And instead of doing that, instead of being politically potentially unpopular, she's then attacking the disabled with spending cuts. What's very interesting is there was this quote from a representative of Deutsche Bank in the Financial Times today, which I think puts a lot of this into perspective. What is the bad news? It is precisely because recent market volatility is not self-inflicted that there is no easy way out. The fundamental problem the UK has is neither one of high debt nor low growth. There are many countries that have similar macro trajectories to the UK. If low growth and high debt was an issue, why aren't Italy, Japan, and indeed France facing such large bond market pressure? The answer is UK's external deficit. We have argued over the years that it is current accounts, not fiscal accounts, that determine fiscal risks. This can be easily seen in the fact that current account deficits have a better fit to the level of yields than any fiscal metric. The more a country relies on foreign financing for its domestic debt issuance, the more exposed it is to the global environment. From the perspective of external flows, the UK is one of the most vulnerable in the G10, as a big current account deficit and capital flow deficit. By extension, the marginal price setter of the value of gilt is not domestic policy but global yields, i.e., US Treasuries. When US Treasuries sell off, gilt should sell off more than other bond markets. That's how exposed we are to US policy. Given this predicament, how does the UK get out of a vicious circle of higher yields, lesser fiscal space, and lower growth? In a world of floating exchange rates, the answer is simple: a weaker currency. A weaker pound does three things. First, it helps improve the country's negative net international investment position by a mechanical re-evaluation of UK-owned foreign assets. Two, it cheapens up UK assets so eventually they become attractive to buy again for a foreigner. Third, it helps the current account deficit adjust, reducing the reliance on foreign funding. And I agree with this. I think we might see a drop in the pound's value. This will be treated as some kind of drastic failure of the current government's handling of the economy, but this will be something they will have been forced into by international pressures and nothing to do with their own fault. A lot of people are going to try and compare her to Harold Wilson and go on about the pound in the pocket, and that was fundamentally a lot of his undoing. And given that our journalists seem to only be able to view current politics through politics of the past, I think this is going to be really politically damaging for them if that's the case. The UK is just fucked, isn't it? I think that there are potential measures. So there is also a potential for Trump to essentially be forced out of his hawkishness on foreign policy and on tariffs. He could be forced out of his position, potentially. And if he is forced out of that position, a lot of the problems in the US Treasury market will cool and the gilt markets will cool in comparison. So there is a potential for a rewind on Trump policy that will mean that the markets will stop being so volatile, and that would be interesting. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Trump campaign and the Trump presidency will create a lot of economic instability for a lot of the country. As it says here, which is somebody being asked to comment on the FT says, there might be a relief valve in the short term if we see Trump's tariffs and tax plans watered down. And of course, also, natural gas is already cooling off, but a Russia-Ukraine ceasefire agreement with a resumption of gas flows could really change the European energy outlook. So if we see a ceasefire in Ukraine and we see more gas flowing into European markets, will increase the supply and push down the price of LNG, that will fix inflation problems. And once the inflation problems are fixed, interest rates can start coming down, and therefore we might see gilt yields coming down as well. So if the Bank of England sees energy prices coming down, we'll probably see rate cuts. That's the biggest source of sticky inflation at the moment, is increased energy prices. So a Russia-Ukraine ceasefire agreement would be more than welcome in seeing a lot of these potential market shocks being a flash in the pan. But it's important to understand that these rise in yields, they don't just represent people being shaky about the economy in the short term, it's also shaky for the economy in the long term. A lot of the movement that we've seen on gilt yields going up have been in long-term yields, but not in short-term ones. It is the long-term trajectory of the UK economy that people are losing confidence in, not the short term. It's the long term of the economy. They believe that we're going into a death spiral. If the yields continue to increase, this is further signs that people around the world are looking at the UK economy and thinking this isn't going to recover. One potential mitigation that Rachel Reeves, I think, is having on this, very specifically, is looking towards China. Now, actually, for a reasonable amount of time, I've been thinking that maybe we should be getting more favorable trade relationships with China. If the US is going into instability mode and is potentially looking at firing tariffs all across the bows at loads of other countries, looking to be at least somewhat amiable with the other half of the kind of global economy, probably is something that we might have to look at if we are looking at a US economy that's going down the pan because of Trump's insane economic policy. Looking towards China as the other global hegemon, given that they can't reverse Brexit for political reasons, basically the only other big trading bloc that we should be looking at is towards China. Now, we can't really look at BRICS with Russia being part of the agreement, but looking towards China as somewhere where we can potentially be deep in economic ties is where Rachel Reeves has been. for the past couple of days. She has gone over to China to have a discussion with them about a future economic relationship. And this is smart. This is smart politics in my mind. I think that there will be a lot of attacking of her from Cold War era politicians who believe that this is fraternizing with the enemy. But with the US economy looking like it's going to go down the pan, and our relationship with Europe completely unable to be reset, is China robust? It's basically China robust at this point. And we might be able to learn some things about their state direction of the economy. So this is something interesting. She's been there for a few days. Let's have a listen to what she had to say.
Growing the economy and raising living standards is the UK government's number one mission. That growth must be secure and resilient. Pragmatic cooperation with our international partners is one such avenue to achieve that economic growth. That includes trade with China, the world's second largest economy and Britain's fourth largest trading partner. The outcomes we've agreed today represent pragmatic cooperation in action. They represent common ground being found on areas like financial services, trade, investment, and the climate. They support secure and resilient growth, providing mutual benefit for both the UK and China, while safeguarding national security as the first duty of government. The total value of what we have agreed today is worth £600 million over the next 5 years for the UK economy. At the same time, we discussed that there will need to be areas where we disagree, and it is important that we can have open and frank exchange on these issues. That includes concerns on national and economic security, market access and impacts of subsidies and industrial policy to ensure a level playing field exists. We will make better use of channels to discuss our respective measures to safeguard the security and resilience of our economies. It also includes Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, which has far-reaching implications, and Hong Kong, where we have concerns on rights and freedoms, but where we also have shared interests. Not every conversation will be easy. However, it is essential and in the UK's national interest that as two major economies, the UK and China commit to building a stable, pragmatic, bilateral relationship.
And I think that this is smart politics, as I said before. If we are looking towards an economy which has the money to invest, there was previous desire to have a more close relationship, especially with China investing in like the UK stock market. That didn't come to fruition. So her trying to be able to get a closer relationship and kind of stop a lot of the hawkishness. We saw the Conservative Party be super anti-China, going after our Chagos Islands deal because Mauritius was an ally of China, because they actually did, mutual beneficial trade relationships between the two of them. And on top of that, they started banning Confucius Institutes because of the Chinese spy network. I think this is smart politics. And then you'll see a lot of conservative people saying, why isn't Rachel Reeves in the UK? There is a bond market crisis. Stay here and stop going to China. They're our enemies because they didn't realise that this is good policy. We have to attack it nebulously rather than talk about the fact that this is good policy. The only thing that would actually matter about the bond market turmoil, quote unquote, is going to happen at the spending review, and that happens in March. So the idea that somehow she should be in the UK right now because it's a crisis, just not true. They're trying to make you think it's like Liz Truss and there should be emergency action to salvage the economy. That's not true. We'll wait until the spending review happens in March, and then we'll have to deal with the cuts when they come then. That's bad and it's stupid, and she shouldn't be doing the cuts. But the idea that she should be fixing the mess now like it's a Liz Truss event, that's just not true. And it's terrible that she's gone to China. That's just cope. It's totally cope, right? What's also really important about having an economic relationship with China is that since Donald Trump has been elected, there is going to be a divestment in green projects, which had massively increased during the Biden presidency and the Inflation Reduction Act. If the US divests from green tech totally and goes all drill, baby, drill, where is the next biggest sector of the international economy that is as focused on green tech that we want to be? And of course, it's China. They have installed more green energy than basically every other country combined in 2024. Solar and wind capacity far outstripped other economies. In fact, they installed more photovoltaic capacity in 2024 than America have ever installed in its own history. So China are really leading the way internationally on green energy. And if we want to be part of that market, engaging in an economic relationship between the two of us that's mutually beneficial, that's something where we can really gain a comparative advantage over an American economy that is throwing the world economy into total shambles. By linking ourselves to the green investment of China, I think this would be productive for the UK economy more broadly. The big problem, though, is that, as you see in this article here, unlike the US and the EU, the UK has not put tariffs on Chinese electric cars. So, whilst we would have access to some of the best value electric cars globally, which would be good for our economy, and we'd be able to get towards net zero much quicker and indeed much cheaper than we otherwise would be able to, because you can get really high quality electric vehicles from China, and we don't have tariffs, but the EU and the US do, meaning we're the ideal trading partner for them to sell us their electric vehicles. The big problem, of course, is that one of the manufacturing industries in the UK that's still pretty good, that's still a kind of a linchpin part of our manufacturing sector that got kind of stripped away during the 1980s and 1990s and moved towards a service economy is the automotive industry. This is why it was such big news when the Vauxhall manufacturing plant was going to shut down and move it all up to Liverpool and Merseyside, where they were going to focus on electric vehicles. They're going to have to compete with tariff-free Chinese vehicles, which will push down wages and might kill a lot of jobs. So overall good for the economy. This is further de-industrializing what few parts of the country are industrialized. This isn't a sector which we aren't invested in. This is one we are invested in, and this can have electoral and political problems for our economy and could cost people a lot of jobs. If we had two separate industries in terms of the green transition that both China and us were engaging in, we could have a very beneficial relationship. This is actually quite a problem if we really want to have a continuation of a manufacturing sector in the UK. So that's one of the problems that we do have, because our car industry is already not doing well. We're already seeing problems in our car industry because of Brexit, because one of our previous biggest trading partners to sell vehicles to was the European Union. And we're going to be buying cars from China, not selling cars to them. Why would China buy our cars? It's going to be bad for automotive workers in the UK. Loads of other good things across like the financial services and green technology, as this article points out, for our trading relationship. But specifically the automotive industry, this could be a problem. So there is some push and pull with this arrangement. I would also say another good thing about geopolitical relationships with China is that in a time when Trump is incredibly hawkish on China, one of the main things that's keeping China from being aggressive with Taiwan is the fact that there is economic interdependence between China and the United States. A breaking down of US China relationships because Trump is fucking crazy could lead to more of an impetus for the CCP to engage in something hostile militarily with Taiwan. If we want to have influence in stopping them from doing that, being economically interconnected with China is the best way of doing that. Mutually beneficial trade agreements and mutually beneficial economic relationships that are symbiotic are the best way of being able to stop military action happening that disadvantages both economies. China, the CCP, they may really want to retake Taiwan, but they won't do it at the cost of their own economy. So having this interdependent relationship is the best way of being able to prevent that. So I don't know. I'm broadly in favour of Rachel Reeves' trip to China and the potential economic benefits that we'll get from it, but it's not without its problems. We'll have to see whether this is going to be fruitful or whether it's going to be a flash in the pan, whether the economic conditions change with America that might bring yields down, whether we can get enough growth out of a future relationship with China to be able to grow faster than our economy is being hurt by rising gilt yields. I don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty happening in the UK economy. But if Rachel Reeves doesn't get a lid on this fast, if we don't find a way of being able to stop the economic doom loop, this could really be the writing on the wall for this Labour government. It really could be. And if she continually says that the fiscal rules have primacy over the health of the disabled, considering that one of the biggest problems with growth in our economy is the fact that too many people are off work, too many people are too sick because our NHS is screwed up, and because it's difficult to get back into work once you become disabled because our welfare system has been stripped back so far by the Conservative government, it's going to be very, very difficult to fix a lot of these basic problems unless she takes some really radical action, which almost certainly she won't, because these people are, again, fundamentally treasury-brained and wedded to the economics of the new Labour administration and Bank of England independence. I will finish up the segment. I'll finish up the segment with one really important point here, in that Rachel Reeves is making poor decisions. That's true. A lot of things are outside of her control. That's also true. If there's one person who we should be blaming the vast majority of these problems on, who else should we be blaming other than George Osborne? George Osborne is the fundamental reason we are in this doom loop. It's not Liz Truss, it's not Rachel Reeves, it's not anything like that, it's not China, it's not Trump broadly, I guess, because we'd be able to weather this storm from Trump even if it wasn't happening in the way that it is right now. If we hadn't done austerity in 2010, George Osborne is 100% to blame. The biggest reason, as I said, for our low growth in our economy is the fact that we are unproductive. And we are unproductive because the George Osborne administration slashed funding for the NHS. The public realm was torn apart. All of the public services that our economy relies on to be a functioning country, to be able to have all of the necessary building blocks of a society in the right place, to be able to have an economy that's functional, stripped away by the Osborne administration. Rates were low. Inflation was low. Yields were the lowest they've been ever. There was so much space to rebuild the public realm, to create an economy that could weather these storms, that could have come out of the pandemic in the way the United States has. They never did austerity. They had a recovery from the pandemic. They continued to grow productively. You look at our economy, graduate premium massively fallen off a cliff. Investment's been low for 15 years. Public health has been lower the entirety of this period. People's real incomes have barely moved. We saw the biggest drop in living standards since the Napoleonic Wars in the wake of the pandemic because of the way in which the people were overexposed to these kind of shocks because Gideon and David Cameron hadn't bothered fixing the economy. Sure, things are bad right now. Liz Truss didn't do a very good job when she was in government. But all of these problems are the result of us not being prepared, us not having the space to be able to react to these geopolitical and these international market problems, which we would have been able to do if we'd not just stripped away our economy to the barest of bones from 2010 to 2016. Benefit payments are really, really high because no one can get an appointment on the NHS. And that was because the waiting lists will continue to increase for the entirety of the time of the Conservative government, even before the pandemic. Investment was low the whole time. The one time where public spending is very, very unlikely to crowd out private investment is when rates are at fucking zero. It was a liquidity trap. We should have been fixing the roof, and we didn't do any of it. And now we have a housing market where people can't get onto. Young people have no money to spend in the economy because they're spending all of their money in rent, which then further pushes up asset prices because landlords reinvest it back into the property market. And our financial assets are overvalued because of quantitative easing being pushed specifically into the pockets of the financiers. Well, at least Xi Jinping thinks that Keir Starmer is fixing the foundations, so there is hope for us yet. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.